Ethan Carter had always felt a deep, unexplainable connection to his grandfather, Henry. From the time he was a child, Ethan remembered sitting on the porch of their old family home, listening to Henry tell stories about the past. The tales were never ordinary. They were filled with mystery, adventure, and just enough strangeness to make Ethan's imagination run wild. But there was something else about Henry that fascinated Ethan even more: the way he spoke about leaving behind something important. It wasn't money or property. It was something far greater, something only future generations would understand. Years passed, and life went on as usual for Ethan. He grew up in the same small town where his family had lived for generations, surrounded by rolling hills, thick forests, and an old cemetery at the edge of town. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, but secrets still lingered beneath the surface. When Ethan inherited the family estate after his grandmother's passing, he didn't think much of it at first. It was just another chapter in his quiet, predictable life. But everything changed one rainy afternoon when he stumbled upon an old shoebox tucked away in the attic. Inside the box were faded letters, brittle photographs, and several worn-out journals belonging to his grandfather. As Ethan flipped through the pages, he noticed recurring phrases like, "The truth lies below," and "What is buried must be uncovered." One entry stood out above all others: "When the time comes, they will find the door beneath the earth." Intrigued, Ethan couldn't shake off the feeling that these words held deeper meaning. Was his grandfather talking about some kind of treasure? A secret message? Or maybe something darker? For days, Ethan pored over the journals, piecing together clues scattered throughout the writings. His grandfather often mentioned the cemetery where he was buried, referring to it not just as a resting place, but as a gateway to something beyond. At first, Ethan dismissed the idea as mere poetic language, but the more he read, the more convinced he became that Henry had hidden something significant there. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan decided to visit the gravesite late one night, when no one would see him. The cemetery was eerie under the pale glow of the moonlight. Shadows stretched across the ground, and the wind carried whispers through the trees. Holding a flashlight in one hand and a shovel in the other, Ethan made his way to his grandfather's grave. Standing before the weathered headstone, he hesitated. Digging up a loved one's final resting place felt wrong, almost sacrilegious. But curiosity outweighed guilt, and soon enough, Ethan began digging. As the soil gave way, Ethan noticed something unusual. The grave seemed unusually shallow. Most graves were dug 6 feet deep, but this one appeared closer to 3. His heart raced as he continued until his shovel hit something solid. Clearing away the dirt, he uncovered the top of a wooden coffin. With trembling hands, he pried it open, expecting to see remains inside. Instead, he found nothing but empty space. And then, something unexpected caught his eye. Beneath the coffin lid lay a series of heavy wooden planks covering what looked like a trapdoor embedded into the ground. Ethan's breath hitched. This wasn't normal. Whoever built this had gone to great lengths to conceal it. The craftsmanship suggested it had been constructed decades ago, long before modern tools could have made the process easier. Running his fingers along the edges of the planks, Ethan realized they were designed to blend seamlessly with the coffin itself, making them nearly impossible to detect unless you were actively searching for them. Taking a deep breath, he removed the planks one by one, revealing a rusted iron handle attached to a wooden door. His mind buzzed with questions. What could possibly be down there? Why would his grandfather go to such lengths to hide it? And most importantly, should he open it? For a moment, Ethan considered leaving everything as it was and walking away. But something stronger than fear drove him forward, a mix of duty, curiosity, and the nagging feeling that this discovery might change everything he thought he knew about his family. With a final glance over his shoulder to ensure no one was watching, Ethan gripped the handle and pulled. The door creaked loudly as it opened, revealing a dark staircase descending into the earth. The air smelled damp and ancient, carrying with it the weight of secrets long forgotten. Ethan hesitated for a brief second, wondering if he should call someone, perhaps a friend or even the authorities, to document what he'd found. But something told him this was his journey alone. Shaking off his doubts, he grabbed his flashlight and stepped onto the first stair, ready to face whatever awaited him below. Each step echoed in the silence, amplifying the tension building inside him. The walls of the passageway were rough-hewn, stone, cool and slick with moisture. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling, brushing against his face as he moved deeper underground. Despite the chill in the air, sweat trickled down his forehead. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but he pressed on, driven by the need to uncover the truth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan reached the end of the tunnel. There, standing before him, was a massive vault door adorned with intricate carvings and symbols he didn't recognize. The sight sent a shiver down his spine. Whatever lay beyond this door, it was clear that his grandfather, and possibly others, had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect it. Taking a deep breath, Ethan fumbled with the lock, using hints from the journal to decipher its combination. As the mechanism clicked into place, he braced himself for what might come next. Little did Ethan know, opening that door would lead him down a path he could never have imagined, one that would challenge everything he believed about life, death, and the boundaries between the two. The vault door loomed before Ethan, its surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light of his flashlight. He stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The carvings weren't random. They formed patterns almost like a language, but one he couldn't decipher. Some looked like twisting vines, others resembled eyes watching from every angle. It was as if the door itself was alive, silently daring him to open it. Despite the unease creeping up his spine, Ethan knew there was no turning back now. This was why he had come here, to uncover the truth his grandfather had left behind. Taking a deep breath, Ethan pushed against the heavy door. It groaned in protest, the sound echoing through the narrow passageway like a warning. For a second, he thought it might not budge, but then, with a final shove, the door creaked open just wide enough for him to slip inside. The air beyond was colder than the tunnel, biting at his skin and making him shiver. He stepped cautiously into the chamber, sweeping his flashlight around to take in the scene. What he saw took his breath away. The room was small but filled with artifacts, items that looked ancient and out of place in the modern world. There were faded photographs pinned to the walls, their edges curling with age. In one picture, Ethan recognized his grandfather standing, alongside several other men, all dressed in dark suits with serious expressions on their faces. They were gathered around a large table covered in papers and strange instruments Ethan couldn't identify. Another photo showed the same group standing outside what appeared to be an old church, its steeple reaching toward the sky. Something about the way they stood, shoulder to shoulder, united yet secretive, made Ethan's stomach twist. On a wooden shelf against the far wall sat stacks of yellowed documents tied together with fraying string. Ethan picked up one bundle and flipped through it carefully. The handwriting was spidery and difficult to read, but he caught snippets of phrases: the veil between worlds, energy manipulation, and communication beyond mortality. His heart raced as he realized these weren't ordinary records. They were notes detailing experiments. What kind of experiments? He wasn't sure yet, but the implications sent a chill down his spine. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, carved from black stone, polished smooth and gleaming faintly in the flashlight beam. Resting atop it was a locked chest, its surface adorned with more of the eerie symbols from the vault door. Unlike the rest of the items in the chamber, the chest looked untouched by time, as if it had been placed there only yesterday. Ethan approached it slowly, his footsteps muffled by the dirt floor. He ran his fingers over the intricate designs, marveling at their precision. Whoever had created this had done so with great care, as though protecting something of immense value. As he examined the chest, Ethan noticed something tucked beneath it, a folded piece of paper bearing his name. His hands trembled as he unfolded it and read the message scrawled in his grandfather's familiar handwriting. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you've found what I hoped would remain hidden. I wanted to spare you from this burden. But perhaps fate has decided otherwise. Inside the chest lies knowledge too dangerous to share freely. Be careful who you trust, and remember, some truths are meant to stay buried. The note ended abruptly, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. Why hadn't his grandfather destroyed whatever was inside the chest instead of hiding it? And why did he feel compelled to warn Ethan about trusting others? The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. He glanced back at the chest, hesitating. Should he open it, or leave it untouched, respecting his grandfather's wishes? Before he could decide, a soft sound broke the silence, a faint scratching noise coming from somewhere behind him. Ethan froze, his pulse quickening. He spun around, shining his flashlight into the shadows, but the beam revealed nothing unusual. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, prickling the hairs on the back of his neck. He told himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, but the sensation refused to fade. Turning back to the chest, Ethan resolved to press forward. Whatever secrets lay within, he needed to know. Using clues from the journal he'd brought with him, he began working on the lock. It was a complex mechanism, requiring both a combination and a specific sequence of turns. After several tense minutes, the lock clicked open and Ethan lifted the lid with bated breath. Inside the chest was a single object, a leather-bound book. Its cover was cracked and worn, the title embossed in gold letters that had faded over time. Carefully, Ethan pulled it out and opened it to the first page. The pages were brittle, their edges tinged with brown, and the ink smelled faintly of earth. As he skimmed the text, his eyes widened in disbelief. The book detailed experiments conducted by his grandfather and others, experiments involving attempts to contact the dead. At first, Ethan thought it sounded absurd. How could anyone communicate with spirits? But as he read further, the descriptions became increasingly detailed. Diagrams illustrated devices designed to capture ethereal energy, while notes documented interactions with entities described as intelligent and aware. One passage sent chills coursing through him. We have succeeded in isolating a fragment of the other side. It is sentient, adaptive, and growing stronger with each interaction. Beneath the book lay a glass vial wrapped in protective cloth. Ethan unwrapped it cautiously, holding it up to the light. Inside swirled a faint glowing mist that seemed to shift and dance of its own accord. The sight mesmerized him, drawing him in despite the unease bubbling in his gut. He couldn't explain how or why, but he felt certain that this mist was connected to the experiments described in the journal. For a moment, Ethan considered putting everything back exactly as he'd found it, and leaving the vault forever. The easier things he'd uncovered were unlike anything he'd ever imagined, and the weight of their significance pressed down on him. Yet curiosity burned brighter than fear. Who were the people in those photographs? What had driven them to pursue such dangerous research? And most importantly, what had happened to them after their experiments? As Ethan sat cross-legged on the cold floor, poring over the journal and examining the artifacts, he became acutely aware of the isolation surrounding him. The vault was miles underground, cut off from the rest of the world. No one knew where he was, and even if they did, would they believe him if he tried to explain? The thought made him feel both vulnerable and strangely powerful. Here, in this hidden chamber, he held pieces of a puzzle that had eluded humanity for centuries. But as he delved deeper into the contents of the chest, a nagging doubt crept into his mind. His grandfather's note had warned him about the dangers of the knowledge contained within. Was Ethan prepared to face the consequences of uncovering the truth? Or was he walking blindly into something far greater and far darker than he could comprehend? Unbeknownst to him, the answer would come sooner than expected. As he reached for the vial again, intending to study it more closely, the ground beneath him gave a subtle tremor. The mist inside the glass seemed to swirl faster, responding to some unseen force. Ethan's grip tightened reflexively, and for the first time since entering the vault, he felt a flicker of genuine fear. Whatever he had awakened, it wasn't done sleeping yet. Ethan stared at the glowing vial in his hand, its swirling mist pulsing faintly as if alive. The tremor beneath his feet had stopped, but the air around him felt heavier, charged with an energy that prickled his skin. He placed the vial back on the pedestal carefully, half expecting it to shatter or explode. Instead, the mist settled slightly, though it still seemed to shift unpredictably, almost as if it were watching him. His mind raced. What was this thing? And why did it feel like it was waiting for something? He turned his attention back to the leather-bound journal, flipping through its pages more urgently now. The entries painted a chilling picture of obsession and ambition. Ethan learned that his grandfather, Henry Carter, had been part of a secretive group known as the Order of the Veil. This wasn't just some random collection of curious minds. It was an organization dedicated to exploring the boundaries between life and death. Their goal, according to the writings, was to unlock the mysteries of the afterlife and harness its power for humanity's benefit. At first glance, their intentions sounded noble, easing grief by allowing people to communicate with lost loved ones, curing diseases by understanding the nature of mortality. But as Ethan read further, the tone of the entries shifted. What began as scientific curiosity soon spiraled into something darker. The experiments grew bolder, riskier, and increasingly dangerous. The journal described how the Order had succeeded in capturing what they called a fragment of the other side, an entity composed of raw ethereal energy. At first, the fragment responded passively, seemingly content to exist within the confines of the glass vial. But over time it began showing signs of intelligence. One entry stood out among the rest, written in shaky handwriting that suggested panic. We underestimated it. The fragment is not merely energy. It is aware. It learns, adapts, and feeds off our fear. We thought we controlled it, but now I fear it controls us. The passage sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He flipped ahead to later entries, searching for answers. What happened next? Did the Order manage to contain the entity, or did it escape? The final pages of the journal were filled with frantic scribbles, barely legible. Phrases like, "It grows stronger and we cannot stop it," repeated throughout. The last entry ended abruptly mid-sentence. "If anyone finds this, destroy the fragment. Do not—" Ethan swallowed hard, closing the book. Whatever the Order had unleashed, it clearly hadn't ended well. Yet here he was, sitting in a hidden vault, beneath his grandfather's grave, holding the very thing they had warned against. A knot of dread tightened in his stomach. Had Henry sealed the vault to protect the world from the fragment, or to keep it contained until someone else could deal with it? As he sat there trying to process everything, the chamber seemed to grow colder. The shadows cast by his flashlight stretched unnaturally long across the walls, distorting the shapes of the artifacts stacked around him. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Every creak of the wooden shelves, every drip of water from the ceiling made him jump. He glanced over his shoulder repeatedly, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing behind him. Then came the whispers. At first, they were so soft he thought he imagined them. A faint murmur carried on the stale air of the vault. But as seconds passed, the sound grew louder, clearer. Voices overlapped one another, speaking in languages Ethan didn't recognize. Some sounded pleading, others angry, and a few almost amused. His heart pounded as he realized the voices weren't coming from outside. They were emanating from the vial itself. The mist inside swirled faster, glowing brighter, reacting to the cacophony of whispers filling the room. Ethan scrambled backward, nearly knocking over the pedestal in his haste. The voices grew louder still, pressing against his ears like a physical force. He clamped his hands over them, but the sound persisted, drilling into his skull. Panic surged through him as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Was the fragment trying to communicate? Or was it simply feeding off his fear, growing stronger with each passing moment? Just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, the whispers stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, leaving Ethan gasping for breath. He looked around, expecting something terrible to happen, but the room appeared unchanged. The vial sat quietly on the pedestal, its glow dimmer now, as if it had exhausted itself. For a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to hope that whatever had occurred was over. Maybe the fragment needed time to recharge before it could act again. But then movement caught his eye. Out of the corner of the room, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It wasn't like any ordinary shadow. It stretched and twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that defied logic. Arms extended too far, fingers elongated into claws. A head emerged, featureless except for two hollow eyes that glowed faintly. Ethan froze, his body refusing to obey his commands to run. The shadow crept closer, oozing across the floor like liquid darkness. "Who are you?" Ethan managed to choke out, his voice trembling. The shadow didn't respond verbally, but the whispers returned, louder this time, echoing directly in his mind. They weren't chaotic anymore. They formed coherent words, though their meaning chilled him to the bone. "You have awakened me." Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on the dirt floor. The shadow loomed above him, its form shifting constantly, never settling into one shape for long. Its presence radiated malice, a tangible weight pressing down on him. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but terror paralyzed him. All he could do was stare up at the creature, hoping desperately that it would vanish as quickly as it had appeared. And then, just as suddenly as it had materialized, the shadow dissolved into nothingness. The room fell silent once more, leaving Ethan shaking and drenched in sweat. He scrambled to his feet, his thoughts racing. Whatever the fragment was, it wasn't just a harmless experiment gone wrong. It was alive, intelligent, and capable of manifesting in ways he couldn't begin to understand. Realization dawned on him slowly, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. The Order hadn't failed because they lacked skill or resources. They had failed because they had created something beyond their control, something that thrived on fear, chaos, and despair. And now, thanks to his curiosity, it was free. Or, at least partially so. Ethan knew he had two choices: leave the vault immediately and pretend none of this had happened, or stay and figure out how to contain the fragment before it became unstoppable. Leaving would be easy, safer even. But deep down he understood that running wouldn't solve anything. If the fragment truly fed on human emotions, it would only grow stronger as it spread. Ignoring the problem wasn't an option, not if he cared about protecting others. Taking a shaky breath, Ethan steadied himself. He grabbed the journal and tucked it under his arm, keeping the flashlight trained on the vial. Whatever happened next, he needed to stay calm. The key to containing the fragment had to be somewhere in the journal. He just had to find it. As he pored over the pages again, looking for clues, he noticed something he'd missed before: a diagram sketched near the end of the book. It depicted a ritual involving symbols drawn on the ground, candles arranged in a specific pattern, and the vial placed at the center. The accompanying text was sparse but clear. To seal the fragment, perform the binding rite. Failure will result in catastrophic consequences. Ethan frowned. The instructions were vague, offering little detail about how to execute the ritual properly. Still, it was better than nothing. Gathering his courage, he decided to attempt it. He cleared a space on the dirt floor, using his flashlight to illuminate the area. Then, using a piece of chalk he found among the artifacts, he began copying the symbols onto the ground as accurately as possible. Each stroke felt like a gamble, every line a potential trigger for disaster. But he pressed on, driven by desperation. As he worked, the temperature in the vault dropped sharply. His breath came out in visible clouds, and frost began forming on the stone walls. The whispers returned, softer this time but insistent, urging him to stop. Ethan ignored them, focusing all his energy on completing the ritual. When the final symbol was drawn, he placed the vial at the center of the design and lit the candles surrounding it. The flames flickered erratically, casting wild shadows across the chamber. For a moment, nothing happened. Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. Maybe the ritual had worked. Maybe the fragment was already sealed away again. But then the ground beneath him shook violently, throwing him off balance. The vial tipped over, rolling dangerously close to the edge of the chalk circle. Without thinking, Ethan lunged forward to catch it. his fingers brushing against the glass, and the world exploded into light. When Ethan opened his eyes, he found himself lying on the cold floor, disoriented and gasping for air. The candles had burned out, their wax pooling onto the dirt. The vial remained intact, but the glowing mist inside was eerily still, as if holding its breath. For now, at least, the fragment seemed subdued. But Ethan knew better than to trust appearances. Whatever he had done, it wasn't enough. The fragment was still here, lurking, waiting for its next opportunity to break free. And unless he figured out a way to destroy it completely, it would never truly be gone. The aftermath of the ritual left Ethan drained, both physically and mentally. His hands trembled as he pushed himself up from the cold floor, his body aching from the violent tremors that had shaken the vault moments before. The air was thick, with an unnatural stillness, broken only by the faint hum of energy emanating from the vial at the center of the chalk circle. Though the glowing mist inside seemed subdued, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that it was merely biding its time, waiting for another chance to break free. He picked up the journal again, flipping through its pages with renewed urgency. If the fragment wasn't fully contained, and he was certain it wasn't, then he needed answers. Fast. Scanning the entries, he found references to what the order called the binding rite, the same ritual he had just attempted. According to the notes, the rite was designed to suppress the fragment's power temporarily, but it wasn't a permanent solution. To truly eliminate the threat, the order believed they would need to perform a second, far more dangerous ceremony, the banishment ritual. Ethan's heart sank as he read the details. The banishment ritual required specific components, items, the order had gathered over decades of research. Unfortunately, many of these items were now missing or destroyed, according to later entries in the journal. Worse still, the ritual demanded something even more daunting, a human sacrifice. Someone had to willingly give their life to seal the fragment away forever. This revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He closed the journal, his mind reeling. Could he really go through with such a thing? Sacrificing himself meant leaving behind everything. The quiet life he'd built, the memories of his family, the possibility of ever finding happiness again. Yet, if he didn't act, the consequences could be catastrophic. The fragment was intelligent, adaptive, and growing, stronger with each encounter. It fed on fear, despair, and chaos, amplifying those emotions in anyone who came near it. If unleashed into the world, it could spread unchecked, driving people mad and plunging society into darkness. As Ethan wrestled with his thoughts, the whispers returned, softer this time but unmistakable. They slithered into his mind, probing his fears and doubts. Images flashed unbidden before his eyes, his childhood home burning, his loved ones screaming, entire cities consumed by shadow. Each vision was sharper, more vivid than the last, until Ethan clutched his head in agony. Was the fragment trying to manipulate him? Or was it simply feeding off his inner turmoil? No, Ethan whispered aloud, forcing himself to focus. He couldn't let it win. Not yet. Determined to find a way forward, he began searching the chamber for anything that might help. Among the artifacts stacked against the walls, he discovered a small wooden box tucked beneath a pile of dusty books. Inside was a collection of objects, a silver dagger engraved with runes, a crystal orb clouded with dark veins, and a folded piece of parchment bearing instructions written in Latin. Ethan recognized some of the symbols from the journal. They matched those used in the banishment ritual. His pulse quickened. Could these items be part of what he needed? He carefully examined each object, piecing together their purpose based on the fragmented descriptions in the journal. The dagger, he realized, was meant to draw blood, a key component in activating the ritual's protective barrier. The orb served as a conduit, channeling the fragment's energy during the banishment process. And the parchment contained the incantation required to send the fragment back to the other side. But there was one glaring problem. The ritual also required a second participant, someone to anchor the caster's spirit while they performed the incantation. Without this anchor, The caster risked being pulled into the void along with the fragment, leaving the door between worlds wide open. Ethan frowned, glancing around the empty chamber. Who could he trust with such a responsibility? He was alone here, miles beneath the earth, cut off from the rest of the world. A sudden realization struck him. Maybe he wasn't entirely alone. Reaching into his pocket, Ethan pulled out the note his grandfather had left for him. He reread the words, paying closer attention this time. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you found what I hoped would remain hidden. I wanted to spare you from this burden, but perhaps fate has decided otherwise. Inside the chest lies knowledge too dangerous to share freely. Be careful who you trust, and remember, some truths are meant to stay buried. Henry's message had always felt cryptic, almost ominous. But now it took on new meaning. His grandfather hadn't just hidden the fragment, he had anticipated someone finding it someday. And judging by the tone of the note, Henry might have known exactly how dangerous the situation was. Could it be possible that Henry's spirit lingered nearby, tied to the fragment he had helped create? Ethan stood abruptly, his gaze darting around the chamber. "Grandpa?" he called out hesitantly, his voice echoing off the stone walls. At first there was no response. Then a faint shimmer rippled across the air like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. Slowly, a figure materialized before him. A translucent version of Henry Carter, dressed in the same suit Ethan remembered from old photographs. For a moment, Ethan forgot to breathe. His grandfather looked exactly as he had in life, though slightly faded, as if viewed through frosted glass. Henry's expression was grave, his eyes filled with sorrow and regret. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that sent shivers down Ethan's spine. "You weren't supposed to find this," Henry said softly, his tone tinged with sadness. "I tried to bury it deep enough that no one would ever uncover it, but I see now that fate has other plans." Ethan swallowed hard, struggling to find his voice. What is this thing?" he asked, gesturing toward the vial. "And why did you hide it here?" Henry sighed, lowering his gaze. "It's a fragment of the other side, a piece of eternity brought into our world. We thought we could control it, use it to bridge the gap between life and death. But we were wrong. It's alive, aware, and hungry. It feeds on fear, despair, and suffering. Every attempt we made to contain it only made it stronger. But why didn't you destroy it?" Ethan pressed, his frustration mounting. "If it's so dangerous, why leave it here at all?" "Because we couldn't," Henry replied sharply, his voice carrying an edge of desperation. "Destroying? It would have torn apart the fabric of reality. The best we could do was seal it away and hope it remained dormant. But now—" He trailed off, looking at the vial with a mixture of guilt and dread. "Now it's awake, and it won't stop, until it consumes everything." Ethan clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "So what am I supposed to do, just sit here and wait for it to take over?" "No," Henry said firmly, stepping closer. "There's still a way to stop it. The banishment ritual. But it comes at a cost. A great cost." Ethan nodded grimly. He already knew what that cost was. "I'll do it," he said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." To his surprise, Henry shook his head. "You don't understand. You can't do this alone. The ritual requires an anchor, someone to hold your spirit steady while you cast the fragment out. That's why I'm here. I can guide you through it, but even then, there's no guarantee of success." The weight of his grandfather's words settled heavily on Ethan's shoulders. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Was he ready to sacrifice everything for this? Could he truly face the unknown horrors that awaited him on the other side of the ritual? Before he could second-guess himself, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that mocked him silently. The fragment was growing restless, eager to break free once more. Time was running out. "Tell me what to do," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. Henry nodded, his expression softening. First, we prepare the chamber. Draw the symbols again, larger this time. Place the orb at the center, surrounded by candles. Hold the dagger close. It will protect you when the time comes. And whatever happens, don't lose focus. One misstep and the fragment will consume us both. With his grandfather's guidance, Ethan set to work. He redrew the symbols on the ground, making them bold and precise. He arranged the candles in a perfect circle around the orb, ensuring the light burned steadily. Finally, he gripped the silver dagger tightly, its cool metal grounding him as the whispers grew deafening. When everything was ready, Henry placed a ghostly hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Once we begin, there's no turning back." Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. "I'm sure," he said, meeting his grandfather's gaze. "Let's finish this." Together, man and apparition stepped into the circle, standing side by side as the ritual began. The air crackled with energy, and the shadows swirled violently, drawn to the source of power within the chamber. Ethan raised the dagger high, reciting the incantation in Latin, his voice trembling but resolute. As the final words left his lips, the fragment surged forward, desperate to escape. In that moment, Ethan understood the true gravity of his decision. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone above ground, unaware of the darkness lurking beneath their feet. With a final surge of determination, he plunged the dagger into the orb, sealing the fragment away forever. The light exploded outward, engulfing the chamber in blinding brilliance. When it faded, the vial was empty, its contents gone. Ethan collapsed too. The silence that followed the ritual was deafening. Ethan sat on the cold, damp floor of the vault, his body trembling with exhaustion. The air felt lighter, almost serene, as if the oppressive weight that had hung over the chamber for decades had finally lifted. But despite the calm, Ethan couldn't shake the emptiness that settled in his chest. His grandfather's final words echoed in his mind. "Take care of the living." It was a simple phrase, yet it carried a profound meaning. One Ethan wasn't sure he fully understood. He glanced at the empty vial lying in the center of the chalk circle. Its once glowing mist was gone, banished to whatever void Henry and the Order had described in their writings. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to feel relief. The fragment, an ancient, intelligent force that thrived on fear and despair, was no longer a threat. He had done what countless others before him had failed to accomplish. Yet as he looked around the chamber, now eerily still, he couldn't help but wonder, at what cost? Henry's spirit had vanished along with the fragment, leaving Ethan truly alone. The apparition's presence, though brief, had been a source of comfort, a reminder that he wasn't entirely on his own during the most harrowing moments of his life. Now, without his grandfather's guidance, Ethan felt the full weight of his isolation. The artifacts scattered across the room seemed colder, more distant, as if they too recognized that their purpose had been fulfilled. Even the flickering candle flames, which had burned so brightly during the ritual, were reduced to smoldering wicks. Ethan forced himself to stand, his legs stiff and unsteady. Every movement felt like an effort, as though the ritual had drained not just his physical strength but something deeper within him. He picked up the journal and tucked it under his arm, careful not to damage its fragile pages. It was the only record of what had transpired here, a testament to the sacrifices made by his grandfather and the members of the Order. Though Ethan didn't know what he would do with it, he knew it couldn't stay buried in this forgotten vault. As he prepared to leave, he noticed something unusual. One of the photographs pinned to the wall caught his eye, a picture of the Order standing outside the old church. In the background, barely visible through the foggy glass of the church window, was a faint outline of a figure. At first glance, it appeared to be a trick of the light, but upon closer inspection, Ethan realized it was unmistakably human. The posture, the tilt of the head. It reminded him of someone watching from afar, observing the group with quiet curiosity. A chill ran down his spine. Could the fragment have influenced others beyond the confines of the vault? Had it already spread its tendrils into the world above before being sealed away? Or was this figure simply a bystander, unaware of the dangerous experiments taking place nearby. Either way, the image gnawed at Ethan, planting seeds of doubt about whether the fragment's influence had truly ended. Determined to find answers, Ethan carefully examined the other photographs. Each one revealed subtle anomalies, shadows that didn't align with the lighting, faces blurred as if intentionally obscured, and objects in the background that seemed out of place. These weren't mere coincidences. They were signs of interference, evidence that the fragment's reach extended far beyond the rituals described in the journal. Its power hadn't been limited to the vault. It had seeped into the lives of those who sought to control it, twisting reality itself. Ethan's thoughts turned to the town above ground. How many people had unknowingly been affected by the fragment's influence? Were there others like him, descendants of the Order, drawn to uncover secrets they didn't fully understand? The idea sent a shiver through him. If the fragment had left traces behind, then perhaps its banishment wasn't as complete as he had hoped. Maybe it had planted fragments of itself throughout the years, waiting for new hosts to awaken its dormant energy. Suddenly the whispers returned, not loud or overwhelming, but soft and insidious, like a distant echo. They weren't coming from the vial this time. Instead, they seemed to emanate from the very walls of the chamber. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He spun around, shining his flashlight into every corner, but the room remained unchanged. The shadows stayed, put, the artifacts undisturbed. Still, the whispers persisted, growing louder with each passing second. "You think it's over." The voice was different this time, not chaotic or fragmented, but singular and deliberate. It spoke directly to Ethan, bypassing his ears and resonating in his mind. He pressed his hands against his temples, trying to block it out. But the sound only grew clearer. "You've closed one door, but others remain open." Ethan staggered backward, his breath quickening. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "What do you want?" There was no response, only the relentless murmurs weaving through his thoughts. Panic began to rise within him, threatening to overwhelm his fragile composure. Was the fragment still alive? Had the ritual failed after all? Or was this something else entirely, a lingering piece of the entity that refused to fade? Before he could process the implications, the ground beneath him trembled violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the candles toppled over, extinguishing themselves in pools of wax. The temperature plummeted, and the air became thick with an unnatural chill. Ethan dropped to his knees, clutching the journal tightly as the chamber seemed to warp around him. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting into grotesque shapes that loomed overhead. Faint outlines of figures appeared in the darkness, their forms indistinct but menacing. And then, as suddenly as it began, the chaos subsided. The trembling stopped, and the oppressive atmosphere dissipated, leaving Ethan gasping for breath. He looked around, expecting to see some sign of the fragment's return, but the chamber was silent once more. The artifacts remained untouched, the chalk symbols intact. Whatever had caused the disturbance had vanished as quickly as it had arrived. For a long moment, Ethan sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. What had just happened? Was it a warning, a test, or merely a remnant of the fragment's power, lashing out one last time before fading completely? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. The danger wasn't entirely gone. Something or someone was still watching, waiting. Gathering his courage, Ethan stood and made his way toward the vault door. He couldn't linger here any longer. The longer he stayed, the more vulnerable he felt. As he climbed the stone staircase leading back to the surface, he replayed the events of the past few hours in his mind. The ritual, the whispers, the unsettling photograph. It all pointed to a larger mystery, one that extended far beyond the boundaries of the vault. When he emerged into the cool night air, the cemetery was bathed in moonlight. The graves stood, silent and still, their secrets safely buried beneath layers of earth. Ethan hesitated, glancing back at the hidden entrance to the vault. Should he seal it permanently, ensuring no one else could stumble upon its contents? Or should he leave, As it was, a reminder of the sacrifices made to protect the living. In the end, he chose neither option. Instead, he retrieved a small wooden plaque from his bag, a makeshift memorial he had brought with him, and placed it near the headstone. Carved into the wood were 3 simple words: "Rest in peace." It wasn't much, but it was enough to honor the legacy of those who had come before him, the men and women of the Order who had risked everything to contain the fragment. As Ethan walked away from the cemetery, he vowed to keep their story alive, even if it meant carrying the burden of their secrets for the rest of his days. But as he reached the edge of the forest, a sudden realization struck him. The journal, tucked under his arm, contained knowledge too dangerous to share freely, knowledge that could either save humanity or destroy it. If the fragment had truly left traces behind, then others might seek to uncover its secrets, just as he had. And if that happened, the cycle of fear and obsession would begin anew. Ethan paused, staring up at the stars. Somewhere out there in the vast expanse of the universe lay the answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. Questions about life, death, and the boundaries between them. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. The truth wasn't meant to be buried forever. It was meant to be guarded, protected, and passed down to those wise enough to wield it responsibly. With a heavy heart and a renewed sense of purpose, Ethan stepped onto the path leading back to town. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it, for the living and for the dead. Ethan's return to the surface felt like stepping into a different world. The cool night air was a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the vault, and the familiar sights and sounds of the cemetery grounded him in a way he hadn't expected. But as he walked away from his grandfather's grave, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching him. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl made him glance over his shoulder. The whispers were gone, for now, but their echoes lingered in his mind, a constant reminder that the fragment's influence might not be entirely erased. By the time he reached the edge of the forest, dawn was breaking. The horizon glowed with soft hues of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the landscape. For the first time in hours, Ethan allowed himself to breathe deeply, filling his lungs with fresh air. He had survived the ritual, banished the fragment, and uncovered truths about his family's past that most people could never imagine. Yet instead of feeling triumphant, he felt burdened. The journal tucked under his arm weighed heavily, not just physically but emotionally. It contained secrets too dangerous to share freely, yet too important to destroy. What was he supposed to do with it? As he approached the old family estate, the house loomed before him, its windows dark and lifeless. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a symbol of everything Ethan had inherited, both the good and the bad. Inside those walls were memories of his childhood, laughter shared with his grandparents, and countless moments of warmth. But there were also reminders of the darkness that had festered beneath the surface. The attic where he'd found the shoebox, the stories Henry had told without revealing their true meaning, and the legacy of the Order that had shaped his family for generations. Ethan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The silence of the house enveloped him, broken only by the creak of floorboards beneath his feet. He placed the journal on the kitchen table, staring at it as if it might leap up and bite him. For a moment he considered burning it, reducing it to ash so no one else could ever use its knowledge for harm. But deep down, he knew that wouldn't solve anything. Destroying the journal wouldn't erase what he'd learned, nor would it undo the sacrifices made by his grandfather and the others who had tried to protect the world from the fragment. Instead, Ethan decided to safeguard it. He retrieved a metal lockbox from the basement, a sturdy container designed to withstand fire and water, and carefully placed the journal inside. Then, using a combination only he knew, he locked it shut. The act brought him some measure of peace, as though he had taken control of the situation, however small. Still, the question remained. What next? Over the following days, Ethan spent hours poring over the journal again, searching for any clues he might have missed. The entries were cryptic, often written in code or shorthand, but they hinted at something larger than the fragment itself. References to other sites and secondary anchors suggested that the Order hadn't confined their experiments to this single location. If Ethan wanted to ensure the fragment's influence was truly gone, he would need to investigate these other places, assuming he could find them. His search led him to the old church depicted in the photograph. It stood on the outskirts of town, abandoned and overgrown with ivy. The structure was crumbling, its steeple leaning precariously to one side, but there was something unsettling about it. As Ethan approached, he noticed faint symbols etched into the stone foundation, similar to those carved into the vault door. They were nearly faded from years of weathering, but they were unmistakable. Inside, the air was musty and thick with decay. Pews lay overturned, their wood splintered and rotting. Stained glass windows, once vibrant with color, were now dull and cracked. At the center of the nave stood an altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. But as Ethan moved closer, he saw something etched into its surface, a map. It was crude, sketched hastily into the stone, but it marked several locations throughout the region. One of them was circled, a spot deep within the forest, miles from civilization. Ethan's pulse quickened. Could this be another site where the Order had conducted their experiments? Was it possible the fragment had left traces there as well? He traced the map with his finger, committing it to memory before snapping a photo with his phone. Whatever answers awaited him in the forest, he knew he couldn't face them alone. This time, he needed help. Back in town, Ethan confided in Sarah, a childhood friend who had always been fiercely loyal and resourceful. She listened intently as he explained everything: the hidden vault, the fragment, the ritual, and the lingering sense that the danger wasn't fully contained. To his relief, she didn't dismiss his story as madness. Instead, her eyes widened with determination. "We'll figure this out together," she said firmly. "Whatever's out there, we'll stop it." With Sarah by his side, Ethan ventured into the forest, guided by the map from the church. The journey was grueling, the dense trees blocking out most of the sunlight and the uneven terrain testing their endurance. After hours of hiking, they arrived at the marked location, a clearing surrounded by towering pines. In the center stood a stone pedestal, much like the one in the vault, but smaller and weathered by time. Resting atop it was a second vial, identical to the one Ethan had banished. Fear gripped him as he approached. Was this another fragment? Had the entity somehow split itself into multiple pieces? He hesitated, unsure whether to touch it. But then Sarah noticed something he hadn't: a faint inscription on the base of the pedestal. It read, "Guardian of the Veil, do not disturb." Ethan exhaled sharply. This wasn't another fragment. It was a fail-safe, a protective measure put in place by the Order to monitor the balance between worlds. The vial contained not a piece of the other side, but a counterforce meant to neutralize any residual energy left behind by the fragment. It was proof that his grandfather and the others had planned for contingencies, even if they hadn't foreseen every outcome. Relieved but wary, Ethan left the vial untouched. He realized then that the Order's work had been far more complex than he'd initially thought. They hadn't just sought to control or banish the fragment. They had tried to maintain equilibrium, to prevent chaos from spilling into the mortal realm. And now, it was up to him to carry on their mission. In the weeks that followed, Ethan dedicated himself to learning everything he could about the Order and their experiments. He scoured libraries, consulted historians, and pieced together fragments of information from obscure texts. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. The Order had disbanded after the fragment's initial containment, scattering its members across the globe. Some had continued their research in secret, while others had chosen to live ordinary lives, hoping to escape the shadow of their past. Ethan resolved to honor their legacy, not by repeating their mistakes, but by ensuring that their sacrifices weren't in vain. He began documenting his findings, creating a record that could be passed down to future generations. It wasn't just about preserving history, it was about preparing for the unknown. The boundary between worlds was fragile, and someone needed to stand guard. One evening, as Ethan sat on the porch of the family estate, Sarah joined him holding 2 cups of coffee. "Think you'll ever get used to all this?" she asked, nodding toward the journal lying open on the table. Ethan smiled, faintly. "Probably not, but maybe that's the point. If I ever stop being scared, stop questioning, that's when I'll know I've lost sight of what matters." Sarah nodded, sipping her coffee. "Well, whatever happens, you're not doing it alone. We're in this together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Ethan felt a rare sense of peace. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, dangers he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, he felt ready to face them, not because he had all the answers, but because he understood the weight of his responsibility. The fragment may have been banished, but its lessons remained. Fear and despair were powerful, forces capable of consuming even the strongest among us. Yet so too were courage and hope. And as long as Ethan carried those values with him, he knew he could protect the living and honor the dead.